Now, leading into the election in November, I think that it's a good conversation to ask people, what do you think is the biggest risk to the United States in the future of the country in general, right? And so, like, if I was going to itemize a few answers I would expect to get from people, I might say thermonuclear war. How about thermonuclear war? That seems like a pretty big risk to the United States, given that we are funding Ukraine now invading Russia. There's that. Or how about if Trump does win the election and then you actually have Democrats in Congress who refuse to confirm him and state the 14th Amendment because he's an insurrectionist or whatever. How about, there's that. And then they implement civil war conditions like they said they would. Okay. So there's that. I don't know. I mean, there's like a million other things. One thing that I did not think that I would hear would be someone at the New York Times actually writing an article that says the Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous? One of the biggest threats to America might be the country's founding document. So they said the quiet part out loud, huh? Quiet part out loud. So, the Constitution, you guys, that's the real danger to the United States. I see things like this, and it's like, I saw it on Twitter, right? Like, it was just a screenshot of this title. And I was like, no way. That is unbelievable that someone would write that article right now. You know what I mean? So here's the deal, right? If I was to pose to you, what do you think the purpose, what do you think their conclusion's going to be here? Like, why would the Constitution suddenly be the biggest threat to the country? Is it going to be A, Trump, B, Trump, C, Trump, or E? You know what I mean? I already know what they're going to say, okay? And I wasn't disappointed. But it's even crazier than you think. So this is this article. I'm going to read you some of it, and this will be the least surprising thing that you've ever heard. United States Constitution is in trouble. After Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, he called for the, quote, termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. What was the context of what he said, or like where did that come from? Something tells me he did not actually say that in the way that she's making it sound. Outraged critics denounced him for threatening a document that is supposed to be sacrosanct. Yes, if he really did say that, okay, if Trump actually said that the way that this is listed, I would pull my support from him immediately. Okay? Bottom line, I don't believe it. So if someone could prove in a long form context that Trump actually said that we should throw out the Constitution, then the sneaker comes off the wall, okay? By announcing his desire to throw off constitutional constraints in order to satisfy his personal ambitions, Trump was making his authoritarian inclinations abundantly clear. I'm telling you right now, like I do not believe anything that they say. Nothing. Nothing. I don't believe a single thing they say. They lied so many times. They misrepresent every single thing that he said. It's like, I don't understand how people trust these guys. How many times they have to lie to you before you start? I mean, listen, dude, like I said, if Trump actually said that, throw out the Constitution, do you really think that conservatives would support him? The entire conservative party would pull their support from him if he actually said, let's throw out the Constitution. It's no surprise then that liberals charge Trump with being a menace to the Constitution. But his presidency and the prospect of a re-election have also generated another very different argument, that Trump owes his political assent to the Constitution, making him a beneficiary of a document that is essentially anti-democratic and, in this day and age, increasingly dysfunctional. Unbelievable. So why is it dysfunctional? Because he owes his political assent to the Constitution, and that makes it dysfunctional. How about he owes his political assent to absolute stone real democracy? Okay, the entire system despises him. Okay, everyone hates him in the system. The people who like him are the voters. That's democracy, you stupid fucks. Okay, that's how that works. If Trump did not have the support of the voters, he would have been gone immediately. The reason that all of the rhinos that were in the Republican Party got weeded out is because Trump was like, that guy's not with us. And so the voters pulled their support from that guy. Trump is the single walking example that democracy still works. And yet every time these people talk about it, it's as if their brains just go, what is democracy? Democracy means that the citizens decide what they want in terms of their elected officials, the laws they want to implement, so on and so forth, etc. How is Trump getting into office? Did Trump like somehow get into office in some weird, obscure way that didn't involve voters like Kamala Harris? Anywho, this New York Times person, exactly the same, dude. Okay, so after all, Trump became president in 2016 after losing the popular vote but winning the Electoral College. He appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court, 2 of whom were confirmed by senators representing just 44% of the population. Those 3 justices helped overturn Roe v. Wade, a reversal with which most Americans disagreed. Okay. The eminent legal scholar Erwin Chemerinsky worried about opinion polls showing a dramatic loss of faith in democracy. What? He writes in his new book, No Democracy Lasts Forever. It is important for Americans to see that these failures stem from the Constitution itself. You're right. I guess we should probably have Democrats rewrite it. We should get rid of the Supreme Court. They should implement mandatory, jab cards and all that other stuff. It's like, dude, back in 2018, Chemerinsky, the dean of Berkeley's law school, still seemed to place considerable faith in the Constitution, pleading with fellow progressives in his book, We the People, not to turn their back on the Constitution and the courts. Markedly pessimistic. Okay, but here's where we get to like this part. He entertains the possibility of secession. West Coast states might form a nation called Pacifica. Red states might form their own country. He hopes that in any divorce it will be peaceful. I mean, listen, you know what's insane about that idea? You know what is so insane about that idea? Any Democrat that suggests secession where they form their own country and we have our own country or whatever. Okay, so real quick, what are we going to do with the military? Well, because the smart money is for us to remain as a unified group with the military, right? Do we really want to try to divide up militaries and then we have 2 separate groups, that have military and can shoot them at each other? The smart money, even if we secede, share the military, right? Is that reasonable? And then you have some kind of process where both countries have to agree if we're going to go to war, something like that, right? So I assume that we can agree on that to avoid everybody getting killed, right? And to both remain extraordinarily powerful, right? Okay, well, that's our entire worldview. Okay, you guys want to govern the way you want to govern the way you want to govern in your fucking state. That's literally the entire platform on our side. It's like, okay, hey, look, dude, we live in an increasingly remote world. So if you have to move, you can in many cases. I feel bad for people who can't. But bottom line is, leave it to states to make up their own rules, which is exactly what we stand for. And so you want to get out. Okay, so what are you going to do that we don't? As soon as we get rid of, Trump's not your president anymore. I figure somehow everything will be Trump's fault, even over in their new fucking country. But anyway, so the prospect of secession sounds extreme, but in suggesting that the Constitution could hasten the end of American democracy, it's unbelievable that they're saying this. The Constitution would, end American democracy. He's far from alone. The argument that what ails the country's politics isn't simply the president or Congress or the Supreme Court, but the founding document that presides over all 3 has been gaining traction, especially among liberals. Quiet part out loud. Right there, dude. Right there. Straight up in plain English. The argument that what ails the country's politics isn't simply the president or Congress or the Supreme Court, but the founding document that presides over all 3 has been gaining traction, especially among liberals. I've never once heard a conservative say that we should throw out the Constitution. Absolutely never once, because they wouldn't be a conservative if they thought that. That's the opposite of conservatism. Okay? As books and op-eds critiquing the Constitution have proliferated, scholars are arguing that the Constitution has incentivized what Stephen Levitsky call a tyranny of the minority. Unbelievable. Does anyone believe that if the liberals who want to write the new Constitution, that it's going to provide freedom, like we're going to get as much freedom as citizens as the current Constitution? Does anyone believe that? What do they want again? It's like, which group wants to have more control over my life? I don't want the government involved in anything that I do. Nothing. Unless it's a police officer coming to my house, okay? Some kind of federal investigative force so that, like national criminals that are operating all over the place can go to prison, okay? Why on earth would we want them to have more rules over us, dude? The anguish is, in some sense, a flip side of veneration. Americans have long assumed that the Constitution could save us. A growing chorus now wonders whether we need to be saved from it. And now we get into the really cheap part that is just ridiculous, dude. Wait until you see what the justification is for why the Constitution should be torn up. Now, listen to this. In 1787, when 55 delegates convened in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation, they ended up embarking on a project that was much bigger in scope. As Americans are taught in history class, the delegates drafted a new document establishing a national government consisting of three branches: legislative, judiciary, and executive, each functioning as a check on the others, right? The delegates were all white and were all men. Oh my God. Well, that means, without diversity, equity, inclusion, I guess the Constitution should probably be rewritten by a conglomerate of, people of color, women, queer people, and we should probably just appoint a president, and they have to be both handicapped, definitely handicapped, gay, queer, trans, and, black or whatever, something that's definitely not white or a man. Unless they are a man who decides they're a woman, then that's fine. So, but they nevertheless diverged on what they deemed to be an intolerable or an intractable issue: slavery. Are you kidding me? You're telling me that the farmers in the southern states where the agriculture was, who relied on slave labor to run their facilities or their farms, it was important to them to maintain the institution of slavery, which is the only way they've ever known their entire lives to manage their farms? Unbelievable. Okay? You do understand that every country in the world has had some form of slavery in its history. All of them. Every single one. Okay? Every single one. We abolished slavery, which is a good thing, right? A lot of people died for that. Okay? And, but the Constitution needs to be rewritten because at the time, people owned slaves and they were trying to protect their livelihoods and businesses, which relied on them, and they knew no different. That makes sense to you? Though several states had already passed abolition statutes, nearly half the delegates were slaveholders. Okay? And that matters in 2024. Why exactly? Does anyone own slaves? Of course not. The Constitution was thus born of compromise. Good. With the enslavers getting the better end of the deal. Says who? To determine representation in the House and the Electoral College, the 3/5 compromise allowed slave states to count 3 out of every 5 people held in bondage, none of whom, needless to say, could vote. And the Fugitive Slave Clause stipulated that even when enslaved people escaped to free states, they would never be free. Okay, how is any of this even moderately relevant? Does anyone count any slaves that are owned in their voting for the Electoral College? That has nothing to do with anything except to pretend like there's some criminal intent behind the Constitution, because at the time, slavery was used by farmers in the South. I'm not saying that it's a moral thing to have slaves or whatever, but this has nothing to do with 2024. Nothing. Such compromises meant that those who shared overlapping politics could still draw wildly different conclusions from the Constitution. The abolitionist William Garrison considered the compromises so damning as to make the Constitution a covenant with death and an agreement with hell. Frederick Douglass maintained the opposite, that slavery in the United States could only be upheld by claiming that the Constitution does not mean what it says. As the historian James Oakes put it, Douglass shared Abraham Lincoln's view, recognizing in the Constitution the promise of universal freedom. I agree with them. That's exactly what it guarantees. A promise of universal freedom, yes, but also instructions on how to thwart it. What the fuck are you talking? What does that have to do with 2024? There's no slavery. What the fuck are you talking about? There's a glaring discrepancy between the soaring words in the Constitution preamble, a call to we the people, that is a seemingly ringing endorsement for popular governments. I can't. Honestly, you get the point, dude. They put this in writing, dude. That liberals, growing group of liberals, think the Constitution is what's ailing the country. Awesome. Okay, that's what I got. Bye-bye.